Chapter 8. The Delectable Mountains. Christian and Hopeful arrived at the Delectable Mountains and found them to be as delightful as their name suggested. For some time they wandered about on the lower slopes, visiting gardens and bathing in rivers, drinking from fountains and eating from vineyards. Then, renewed and refreshed, they climbed to the upper slopes, where they met 4 shepherds whose names were Watchful, Sincere, Knowledge, and Experience. Leaning on their stout walking sticks, Christian and Hopeful asked the herdsmen, "To whom do these mountains and flocks belong?" They answered, "The mountains form part of Emmanuel's land. The prince owns them, as well as these sheep from whom he laid down his life." Then Christian inquired, "Is this the way to the celestial city?" "It is," they replied. Christian's next question was, "Is the way ahead safe or dangerous?" "It's safe for some, but sinners stumble and fall in it," the shepherds answered. "Is there refreshment available for weary travelers?" "The Lord of the mountain tells us to welcome strangers, so all the good things here are for your use," was the gracious reply. Then the shepherds questioned the travelers about themselves and their journey. After listening to their answers, the herdsman smiled warmly at them and said, "Welcome to the Delectable Mountains." Then they escorted them to some nearby tents where they could eat and rest. When they had eaten and rested, the pilgrims were taken by the shepherds on a tour of instruction among the hills and valleys. First, the party climbed to the summit of the Hill of Error, one side of which was a sheer precipice. At its foot lay the smashed limbs and twisted bodies of climbers who had fallen over the edge. The shepherds explained to the appalled pilgrims that they were looking at the mangled remains of adherents of the false teaching of Hymenaeus and Philetus, who insisted that the resurrection of the body had already happened. The bodies lie unburied as a warning to pilgrims, the herdsman concluded. Next, they were taken to the top of Mount Caution, from where they could see a distant graveyard. By focusing their eyes on this spot, they discerned the figures of some blind men who kept stumbling about among the tombs. "He that wandereth out of the way shall remain in the congregation of the dead," the shepherds quoted, adding, "The people you are looking at went over the stile by Bypath Meadow, and so were captured by giant Despair, who put out their eyes and deposited them among the graves, where they remained ever since." At these words, tears sprang into Christian and Hopeful's eyes, and they looked at one another, tacitly agreeing to say nothing of their own encounter with the dreadful ogre. The shepherds then took the pilgrims to a grassy slope in which a door was set. When this was opened, the pilgrims looked down a dark tunnel from which came the roaring and crackling of flames, anguished cries, and a burning sulphurous smell. "This is a byway to hell," the shepherds told the shuddering pilgrims. "It's for hypocrites and people like Esau, who sold his birthright, or Judas, who sold his master. It's also for blasphemers like Alexander, deceivers like Ananias and Sapphira." "These men all began their journey to the celestial city, didn't they?" Hopeful asked. "Yes, and covered quite a distance too," was the reply. The topic interested Hopeful. "How far was it possible for them to go in their time?" he asked. "Some went further than these mountains, others not so far," the shepherds answered. "How much we need the strong one's strength," the pilgrims explained to each other. Christian and Hopeful were by now anxious to be on their way, so the shepherds escorted them to the end of the mountain range. Here they allowed the pilgrims to look through a telescope towards the distant celestial city. Their view through the magnifying glass was not as clear as it might have been, for their hands were still trembling as a result of their glance down hell's byway. In spite of this, they managed to catch a glimpse of the celestial gate and the glory surrounding it. One shepherd then gave Christian and Hopeful a note with directions to the city. Another said, "Beware of the flatterer." A third warned them not to sleep on the enchanted ground. And the fourth wished them Godspeed. Having said goodbye to their helpful hosts, Christian and Hopeful descended the mountainside, singing as they went.